Imagine the world as it truly is, not as we wish it to be, not as the comforting illusions of childhood and romance have taught us, but in its raw, unvarnished reality. You think you know people. You think that smiles are innocent, that gestures are genuine, that words carry the weight of truth. But the world does not operate in the language of truth. The world operates in the language of advantage, of power, of survival. And sometimes, the most dangerous deceptions are not the ones shouted from the rooftops, the obvious betrayals, the flagrant lies. The most dangerous deceptions are those whispered softly into your ear, wrapped in warmth, wrapped in empathy, wrapped in what appears to be care. It is in these moments, when the mask is at its thinnest, that the truth pierces most sharply, and when it does, you will never look at people the same way again. From a young age, we are taught that trust is a virtue. We are told that love is pure, that loyalty is innate, that kindness is the default of the human soul. But life is rarely so charitable. Those who survive, those who rise, those who wield influence do so because they understand a simple, brutal principle. Perception is everything. The world does not care about your morality, about your honesty, about your purity of heart. It only responds to actions, to results, to the ability to navigate the currents of human desire and human weakness. And it is here, in this landscape of hidden motives and concealed intentions, that deception thrives, not as an accident but as an art form. Think about the times you felt blindsided. The moments when someone you trusted, someone you admired, someone you let close enough to shape your thoughts, actions, or emotions, turned out to be something else entirely. Maybe it was subtle at first, a lie about where they were, a misrepresented story, a small omission that seemed harmless. Maybe it grew into something more sinister, a manipulation, a betrayal that shook the very foundation of your understanding of who that person was. These experiences are not anomalies. They are not unfortunate exceptions. They are the rule, because human behavior is rarely guided by simple goodness. It is guided by self-interest, by strategy, by the instinct to survive, to advance, to protect oneself, often at the cost of others. The Stoics teach us that we cannot control external events, that the only thing within our power is our mind, our perception, our judgment. This is not a comfort. It is a responsibility. It is a call to vigilance. When someone presents themselves to you as kind, as nurturing, as trustworthy, your mind must be trained not to accept it blindly, not to surrender to the seduction of warmth. You must observe. You must test. You must remain awake, because the moment you sleep in your assumptions, the moment you trust without scrutiny, you expose yourself to consequences you may never recover from. Awareness is the shield. Understanding is the armor. Clarity is the weapon. Consider for a moment the skill with which deception can operate. It is rarely clumsy. It is rarely loud. True deception whispers, it smiles, it touches lightly. It appeals to your deepest needs, your unspoken desires, your vulnerabilities you barely even acknowledge in yourself. It is easier to deceive a person who wants to believe they are seeing truth. It is easier to manipulate someone who craves validation, who seeks connection, who has not yet learned the cold, hard laws of perception. And when you finally perceive the reality of the situation, when the mask falls and the smile disappears, the sense of betrayal is not just about the other person. It is about yourself too, the part of you that allowed yourself to believe, that let down the walls, that ignored the warnings, that trusted without discernment. Life is filled with examples of this. From history to personal experience, the greatest calamities often arise not from enemies we can see, but from allies we cannot. Kings have fallen because courtiers whispered lies. Empires have crumbled because advisors concealed truths. Relationships, careers, friendships, entire lives have been altered irrevocably by the quiet, almost invisible mechanics of human cunning. This is not to say that all people are deceitful, but it is to say that the potential for deception is universal, and to ignore that potential is to hand power over to forces you cannot control. Imagine someone entering your life like a shadow at dusk, gentle, unassuming, appearing when you are most receptive, when your defenses are naturally down. They speak words you long to hear. They echo your desires. They mirror your emotions. It feels like connection. It feels like safety. And yet beneath the surface there is an agenda you cannot yet see. Every choice they make, every interaction, every carefully constructed action is designed to influence, to guide, to bend reality to their will. And because humans are creatures of emotion, creatures of pattern, creatures who seek meaning, you are drawn in. You want to believe, you want to see goodness, you want to trust. But the Stoic mind asks you to step back, to observe, to measure, to question. It asks you to hold yourself as the ultimate authority over your perception, to never surrender control over what is yours alone, your judgment. The path to this awareness is not comfortable. It is not flattering. It does not appeal to the ego. To see the world in this light is to accept that others may not have your best interests at heart, that charm can be weaponized, that affection can be conditional, and that your vulnerabilities are the most valuable currency you possess. But it is necessary. For those who understand this truth, the world is no longer a place of naive optimism, but a place of clarity. Decisions are sharper, boundaries are firmer, reactions are deliberate rather than instinctive. The pain of betrayal becomes less catastrophic, not because the betrayal itself is less serious, but because the mind is trained to anticipate, to measure, to survive. Awareness is liberation. Think of trust as a fortress, not a gift. The naive believe it is something to hand freely, to distribute without measure. The wise know it is something earned, something carefully guarded, something bestowed only after scrutiny, after understanding, after proof. Every interaction, every gesture, every word is data, signals that reveal intention, character, and truth. To ignore these signals is to surrender the high ground, to allow circumstance and human cunning to dictate your reality. To master this is to live with eyes open, to move through the world unshaken by charm or deception, to act with the precision of a mind that sees clearly. Deception is everywhere. Not only in the obvious lies, not only in betrayal, not only in scandal, but in subtlety, in nuance, in the quiet manipulation of trust and perception. It can be found in the workplace, in friendships, in romance, in the casual interactions of everyday life. People craft narratives to serve their interests. They hide weaknesses to protect power. They amplify virtues to gain advantage. And because humans are pattern-seeking creatures, because we are emotional and empathetic by design, these narratives are effective. We are persuaded not by brute force, but by skillful alignment of perception and desire. And when the veil falls, when the narrative dissolves, the shock can feel like a rupture of reality itself. This is why the first lesson is vigilance. The second lesson is detachment. The third lesson is mastery over your own mind. To experience life fully, to survive the currents of influence, you must learn to observe without surrendering, to feel without being overwhelmed, to act without being deceived. Stoic philosophy teaches that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Betrayal will occur. Deception will exist. What is within your control is the way you perceive it, the way you respond, the clarity you maintain. This is the armor no one can take from you, the shield that deception cannot pierce, the light that reveals shadows where others see none. Consider the world through this lens, and the implications are profound. Relationships, decisions, careers, friendships, alliances, all are no longer abstract concepts or emotional exercises. They are battlegrounds of perception, arenas of influence, spaces where only the aware survive unscathed. A word of kindness may conceal manipulation. A gesture of love may hide self-interest. A smile may mask strategy. Every interaction becomes a test, every exchange a puzzle, every encounter a measure of your awareness, of your ability to discern truth from artifice. And yet, this understanding does not lead to cynicism. It leads to clarity. It leads to power. It leads to freedom. When you recognize the patterns, when you see the intentions beneath the surface, when you understand the mechanics of influence and deception, you are no longer a victim. You are no longer at the mercy of circumstance or charm. You are the architect of your perception, the master of your judgment, the ruler of your emotional domain. You can navigate the world with precision, choosing your alliances, evaluating your trust, measuring your responses. You see the world as it is, not as you wish it to be. And in this, there is a terrifying, exhilarating power. This is why, after watching this video, after observing the reality of human behavior laid bare, you will never look at trust, at relationships, at intentions, at smiles, at words the same way again. You will understand that appearances are not guarantees, that kindness is not innocence, that warmth can conceal calculation. You will begin to measure, to observe, to question. And in doing so, you take the first step toward true awareness. True freedom is born not from comfort, not from naivety, not from blind faith, but from clarity, from understanding, from the stoic mastery of one's own mind. The journey is not easy, it is unsettling. It forces you to confront truths most prefer to ignore. It forces you to abandon comforting illusions and face the harsh, unflinching reality of human behavior. But in this confrontation lies strength. In this awareness lies the capacity to act with precision, to safeguard your interests, to navigate the currents of influence without being swept away. You learn to see through the veils, to recognize the signals, to detect the subtle manipulations before they take root. And in doing so, you reclaim what is truly yours: your mind, your judgment, your clarity, your freedom. Deception is not always obvious. It does not always arrive with shouting or dramatic revelations. Often, it drifts quietly into your life like a fog over a calm lake, softening edges, concealing shapes, blurring perception. It enters under the guise of empathy, charm, attentiveness. A word of comfort, a shared laugh, a glance that seems to understand the parts of yourself you keep hidden from the world. All of these are invitations. Invitations to trust, to believe, to let your guard down. And yet, within these gestures, there can exist a calculation, a strategy, a silent choreography designed to guide your thoughts, feelings, and decisions without your awareness. This is the subtlety of human manipulation, the craft of influence so delicate that it can feel like warmth while it quietly shifts the axis of your reality. Consider the ordinary interactions that populate daily life. Colleagues who flatter at just the right moment, friends who share selective truths, partners who mirror your deepest desires. To an untrained mind, these actions are signs of connection, signals of goodwill, the foundations of trust. To the mind trained in observation, however, they are data points. Every compliment, every smile, every seeming act of care is a potential signal of intent. Manipulation rarely reveals itself in the obvious, for the obvious is too easy to reject. It thrives in nuance, in ambiguity, in the blurred spaces between truth and fiction. And because humans are creatures of emotion, driven by longing, validation, and attachment, these manipulations are often invisible until the consequences arrive. The Stoics teach us that external events are neutral, that meaning is assigned by the mind. Every act of manipulation is only dangerous insofar as you allow it to shape your perception, influence your emotions, or dictate your response. This is not to suggest passivity but vigilance. The cultivation of a mind that perceives without surrender, that observes without attachment, that interprets without being ensnared by the lure of comfort. To experience life as it truly is, one must learn to measure interactions with the precision of a scientist, the detachment of a philosopher, the awareness of someone who understands the mechanics of influence and the fragility of perception. Manipulation often begins with subtle alignment. A manipulator will mirror your gestures, echo your language, reflect your emotional states. It feels like resonance, a connection that validates your experience. This is not coincidence. It is a tool. When someone reflects you perfectly, when they appear to see you as no one else does, the instinct is to trust, to believe, to lower defenses. This is human nature. We are drawn to affirmation, to recognition, to the illusion that we are understood. The manipulator exploits this, creating a bond that is partly emotional, partly cognitive, partly fabricated. The consequences are often invisible until the alignment deepens, until the bond is strong enough to be leveraged. Consider the story of Anna, a woman who seemed to enter every social circle with effortless charm. She laughed at the right moments, validated the insecurities of those around her, shared stories that mirrored the experiences of her new acquaintances. People felt seen, valued, understood. Yet behind this warmth was a network of subtle influence. Information was gathered not for sharing, but for leverage. Emotions were guided not for mutual support, but for control. Friendships were cultivated not for connection, but for access. By the time those around her realized the extent of her manipulation, the damage was extensive. Trust eroded, relationships fractured, reputations tarnished. Anna's story is not unique. It is an archetype, a cautionary example of the power of subtle emotional manipulation when combined with a keen understanding of human desire. The danger of subtle manipulation lies in its invisibility. Unlike blatant lies, which can be confronted and rejected, subtle influence operates below the level of conscious awareness. It shapes your perception before you know it, bends your emotions before you recognize the shift, rewires the landscape of your trust before the first alarm bell rings. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures. We construct narratives to make sense of events. A manipulator exploits this. They provide information selectively, omit inconvenient truths, emphasize certain experiences over others. The mind, eager to maintain coherence, fills in gaps, interprets omissions as intention, assigns causality to carefully crafted sequences. By the time the manipulation becomes visible, the narrative is so ingrained that disentangling fact from influence is a Herculean task. Manipulation thrives on emotion. Rational analysis can detect it, but emotional vulnerability amplifies its effectiveness. Love, desire, admiration, dependency, insecurity, all are fertile grounds for influence. A manipulator does not need force when they have subtlety. They do not need aggression when they have alignment. They do not need confrontation when they can guide emotions like a river channel, shaping behavior without ever touching it. The Stoics remind us, the external cannot harm unless you allow it to. Manipulation only succeeds if perception is unguarded, if emotional attachment is unquestioned, if discernment is suspended. The patterns of influence are universal. In romantic relationships, subtle manipulation often masquerades as care. A partner may isolate you from outside support under the guise of protection. They may guide decisions while claiming to respect autonomy. They may praise selectively, criticize subtly, reward inconsistently, creating a dependency built not on love but on control. In friendships, manipulation may appear as advice, guidance, selective disclosure, or emotional mirroring. In professional contexts, flattery, selective acknowledgement, strategic omission, and social positioning operate with similar mechanics. Across contexts, the principle remains the same. Perception is shaped, emotions are guided, behavior is influenced, often without the target even recognizing it. Consider the psychological principle of reinforcement. Humans are conditioned to respond to patterns. Positive reinforcement encourages behavior, negative reinforcement discourages it. Manipulators exploit this instinctively. They reward loyalty, attention, or compliance. They punish dissent, resistance, or scrutiny. This is often subtle, a pause, a sigh, a withdrawal of warmth, a fleeting expression of disappointment. It is not dramatic, but it is effective. Over time, behavior shifts, perception alters, trust becomes conditional, and the manipulator's control deepens. The effects are cumulative and often invisible until the consequences are undeniable. Awareness is the antidote. The Stoic mind, trained in observation, detachment, and deliberate judgment, recognizes the subtle currents of influence. It does not react reflexively to warmth or flattery. It does not assign meaning to gestures without scrutiny. It does not surrender perception to the illusions of connection. Awareness allows the mind to observe, to question, to evaluate. It creates a space between stimulus and response, between gesture and belief, between interaction and trust. In this space lies freedom, the freedom to choose, to resist, to preserve clarity, to maintain sovereignty over one's own mind. History offers countless examples of subtle manipulation. Leaders who swayed masses with charisma and rhetoric, advisors who guided kings through whispered suggestions, friends who influenced decisions with strategic validation, lovers who shaped emotional landscapes with skillful alignment. The common thread is the same: perception guided without awareness, emotions influenced without recognition, decisions directed without overt force. In each case, the untrained mind was the instrument through which manipulation worked. Awareness, once cultivated, disrupts this mechanism, exposing intent, revealing patterns, reclaiming autonomy. Consider the emotional toll. Subtle manipulation leaves traces not in broken objects or dramatic events, but in quiet confusion, doubt, and internal questioning. You may feel unsettled, unsure, or emotionally drained without understanding why. This is a signal, a warning, a subtle indicator that perception is being influenced. The Stoic approach does not suppress these signals. It does not deny them. It observes them, interprets them, and allows the mind to respond deliberately. By cultivating awareness of emotional shifts, patterns of reinforcement, and alignment behaviors, one can detect subtle manipulation before it crystallizes into harm. The consequences of ignoring subtle manipulation are profound. Trust, once given freely, can be weaponized. Decisions once considered rational can be skewed. Relationships once fulfilling can become arenas of influence. The shock is not only in the betrayal, but in the realization that perception was guided, that autonomy was compromised, that clarity was clouded. Yet these consequences are avoidable. They exist not as inevitabilities, but as opportunities to exercise discernment, vigilance, and mastery over one's own mind. Awareness transforms interaction. Where others see warmth, charm, and connection, the Stoic observer sees alignment, reinforcement, and influence. Where others feel comfort, attachment, and validation, the Stoic observer measures boundaries, evaluates intention, and maintains clarity. Where others are drawn into the subtle choreography of manipulation, the Stoic observer retains sovereignty, preserves judgment, and navigates the world with precision. This does not negate empathy or human connection. It does not render trust impossible. It transforms trust into a deliberate choice, informed by observation, guided by discernment, and protected by awareness. To experience life without awareness is to be a leaf in the wind of influence, drifting wherever currents of subtle manipulation may carry you. To cultivate awareness is to anchor yourself in clarity, to move with intention, to observe without surrender, to trust deliberately, and to act with precision. The mind becomes a fortress. Emotions become instruments of deliberate action rather than reflexive response, and perception becomes a tool of empowerment rather than vulnerability. In this, there is freedom, strength, and resilience, the very qualities that allow one to navigate the complex, subtle, and often deceptive landscape of human behavior without falling victim to its currents. After recognizing these patterns, after observing the subtle orchestration of influence, one cannot unsee what has been revealed. The mind is changed, perception sharpened, trust recalibrated. One begins to understand that manipulation is rarely overt, that deception often wears the guise of connection, that influence is most powerful when invisible. This understanding is not pessimism, it is clarity. It is armor. It is liberation. And it is the key to surviving, thriving, and acting wisely in a world where subtle manipulation is ever present, waiting to exploit unguarded perception, unexamined emotion, and untrained judgment. You might feel anger, disbelief, or even betrayal, but these emotions are not signs of weakness. They are the mind's first recognition of truth, the instinctive reaction to a world that is rarely as it appears. Stoicism teaches us that external events are neutral, only our perception of them determines our experience. Betrayal, deception, emotional manipulation, these are not inherently harmful. What causes suffering is the surrender of judgment, the abdication of clarity, the belief that external events have power over our inner state. The emotions you feel are not enemies, they are signals. They illuminate the discrepancies between perception and reality, between expectation and truth, and between trust given freely and trust earned. To feel is not a liability. To fail to analyze, to misinterpret, to let perception be clouded by comfort, that is vulnerability. Trust, once blind, must now be deliberate. Blind trust is a luxury afforded only to those untouched by experience, to those who have not yet understood the mechanics of influence, to those untested by the currents of manipulation. Once you recognize the patterns, once you observe the subtle orchestration of emotion and perception, once you understand how easily human behavior can be guided, you cannot afford to surrender trust lightly. Every connection, every gesture, every expression must be weighed, measured, and evaluated. This does not mean cold calculation or cynicism. It means sovereignty over your own mind, discipline over your own perceptions, and vigilance over your own responses. Trust becomes a fortress, earned brick by brick, verified and tested, rather than a gift handed freely to anyone who asks. The journey to this understanding is neither short nor easy. It requires observation of human behavior in its most subtle forms. The pause before a word is spoken, the glance that lingers longer than necessary, the patterns of attention and withdrawal. Manipulation, as we have explored, rarely announces itself with clarity. It whispers, it aligns, it reinforces, it conditions. To recognize it, you must train your mind to be awake in every interaction, to detect alignment and subtle influence, to anticipate intention, and to separate the gesture from the motive. This is the discipline of awareness. It is the cultivation of perception as a tool, not merely a passive faculty. The human mind is often reactive, but a trained mind is deliberate, measured, and sovereign. Consider the emotional architecture of relationships. Emotional bonds are powerful, compelling, and often irrational. They can be exploited by those who understand their mechanics. Love, admiration, desire, fear of loss, these are instruments, and those skilled in subtle influence can play them with precision. But awareness dismantles this power. When you understand the triggers, the patterns, the potential for manipulation, the dynamics of influence no longer control you. You become the observer, the judge, the master of your emotional landscape. Emotions still arise, they must, for they are human, but they no longer dictate your actions without examination. Awareness introduces a pause between stimulus and response, between gesture and belief, between interaction and trust. In this pause lies freedom. Anger and disbelief, when channeled through the lens of stoic observation, become tools. They illuminate vulnerabilities, highlight areas where perception was misled, and reveal the boundaries of your judgment. Betrayal, once a source of pain, becomes a source of insight. Each experience is data. A lesson in human behavior, a map of emotional influence, a guide to future interactions. The mind that refuses to see patterns, that ignores signals, that accepts warmth at face value is defenseless. The mind that observes, evaluates, and learns is invulnerable, not in the sense that harm cannot occur, but in the sense that harm cannot dictate perception, emotion, or clarity. Mastery over one's own mind is the ultimate safeguard against manipulation, and it is the source of true power in a world dominated by subtle influence. Every act of deception, every manipulation, every betrayal carries with it a lesson if one is willing to perceive it. The naive believe that trust, once broken, cannot be restored. The wise understand that trust, once evaluated, becomes deliberate. It is no longer a passive state, it is an active choice. By analyzing the mechanics of influence, by observing the subtleties of alignment and reinforcement, by interpreting emotional signals with clarity, one constructs a framework for deliberate trust. This framework does not prevent betrayal, it anticipates it. It does not erase manipulation, it neutralizes its impact. It does not eliminate deception, it equips the mind to perceive it before it can take root. Consider the practical application of these principles in daily life. In friendships, awareness allows you to detect subtle alignment and emotional mirroring. You observe patterns of praise and withdrawal, attention and omission, and evaluate whether they reflect genuine regard or strategic influence. In romantic relationships, awareness enables recognition of isolation tactics, selective validation, and conditional affection. In professional environments, it reveals flattery disguised as advice, strategic omission of information, and manipulation of perception through social positioning. Across contexts, the principle remains the same. Observation, evaluation, and deliberate response create sovereignty over perception. The mind that is aware is never manipulated unconsciously. The power of clarity extends beyond protection from manipulation. It transforms interaction into deliberate action. Once you recognize patterns, understand the mechanics of influence, and cultivate emotional sovereignty, your relationships change fundamentally. You no longer react reflexively to gestures or words, you respond deliberately. You no longer assume innocence in charm or warmth, you assess intention. You no longer surrender trust blindly, you grant it deliberately. This transformation is not cold or detached. It is intelligent, measured, and conscious. It is the embodiment of Stoic wisdom. External events are neutral, perception is yours, clarity is your tool, and freedom is the ultimate outcome. One must also confront the subtle tyranny of hope and desire. Humans are wired to hope, to desire connection, to seek validation. Manipulators exploit this. They offer glimpses of affirmation, moments of warmth, partial truths that align with desire, and in doing so, guide behavior without overt coercion. Awareness does not eliminate hope or desire, it reframes them. Desire becomes an instrument of deliberate action, hope becomes an evaluative framework, and emotional vulnerability becomes a tool for insight rather than a conduit for influence. The mind, trained in observation and Stoic discipline, navigates relationships with clarity and precision. It feels deeply, responds appropriately, and trusts deliberately. History and literature are filled with cautionary tales of emotional manipulation and subtle influence. From Machiavellian courtiers who guided kings through whispered advice, to strategic partners in literature who shaped plots with carefully measured gestures, to modern examples of emotional manipulation in social dynamics, the lessons are consistent. Perception is vulnerable, emotion is exploitable, and influence is most powerful when invisible. Awareness, observation, and deliberate judgment are the antidotes. They do not prevent deception entirely, but they neutralize its impact and preserve sovereignty over the mind. Consider the process of rebuilding trust after awareness. Once you recognize manipulation, once you observe the patterns of influence, trust cannot return to its former state. Blind trust is impossible. Trust becomes conditional, deliberate, and verified. This is not pessimism, it is clarity. By constructing a framework of trust based on observation, evidence, and deliberate evaluation, one creates a psychological immune system against influence. Every action, every gesture, every word is measured against this framework. Trust is no longer assumed, it is earned and maintained consciously. The consequences are profound. Relationships are safer, perception is sharper, and emotional sovereignty is preserved. Mastery over trust requires mastery over emotion. Emotional responses are natural and unavoidable, but they are also subject to interpretation. Anger, disappointment, and disbelief are indicators, not dictators. They reveal vulnerabilities and illuminate patterns. The Stoic mind observes them without surrendering control, processes them without attachment, and uses them as guides for deliberate action. Emotional mastery is not suppression, it is discipline. It is the cultivation of clarity and sovereignty in a world designed to exploit vulnerability. Awareness also transforms the perception of deception itself. Deception is no longer a personal affront, it is data. It reveals intention, character, and patterns. It exposes the dynamics of influence and highlights the limitations of trust. The wise mind does not react with panic, fear, or despair. It observes, analyzes, and adjusts. The shock of betrayal becomes a lesson, the sting of manipulation becomes insight, and the chaos of human behavior becomes a framework for deliberate action. This transformation is profound. It is liberation, it is power, it is freedom. Finally, one must consider the ultimate lesson. Sovereignty over the mind is the highest form of power. Trust is no longer naive, emotion is no longer uncontrolled, perception is no longer vulnerable. Awareness allows the mind to navigate the complexities of human behavior without succumbing to manipulation. Every interaction is observed, every gesture is measured, every pattern is interpreted. The world, with all its charm, deception, and subtle influence, no longer dictates the state of mind. The mind dictates its own state. It perceives clearly, acts deliberately, and trusts consciously. This is the culmination of Stoic wisdom, freedom in a deceptive world. Mastery in a world built on subtle manipulation. Sovereignty in a landscape of uncertainty. After this awareness, you will realize that trust is not given. It is guarded, that perception is not passive, it is cultivated. That emotions are not vulnerabilities, they are instruments of insight. And in that understanding lies power. The power to see clearly, to act deliberately, to navigate relationships and life without falling prey to subtle manipulation, and to exist in the world with sovereignty, clarity, and freedom. Once perceived, the truth reshapes everything. And in this reshaping, you are no longer the passive participant, you are the master of your reality.